The new PSAT writing will test comma usage in addition to the usage of other punctuation marks. But in this video, we're just going to focus on commas, though other punctuation will come into play in some of these choices, as we'll discuss. So there's a lot of rules for comma usage. I'm not going to make this video comprehensive. A comprehensive review of all the comma rules will come in a different video, not in the series, in a separate series. But I do want to touch on these 5 questions, which do have to do with commas, and I will point out some of the general rules that you need to know for commas that help you answer these questions. So let's first take a look at number 4. As long as companies continue to demand long hours from workers, comma, and managers should champion napping as a means to keep employees happy, healthy, and functional. So structurally, there is a problem with this sentence. We start out with what's called a subordinate clause. Basically, a sentence that depends on a future sentence for it to make sense or for the thought to be completed. Right? As long as companies continue to demand longer workers from hours, as long as companies continue to demand long hours from workers, what? Right? We're waiting for the completion of that sentence. Well, we can't then follow it up with a comma and an end. In fact, we just need to follow it up with an end. So the comma is good to separate separate the subordinate clause from the main sentence that follows, the independent clause that follows. But we don't need that conjunction. The conjunction would only be necessary if we were separating 2 independent clauses, 2 complete sentences. So for that reason, A is gone. With C, we've gotten rid of the end, but then we've added a comma after managers, and we never want to put a comma between, well, I shouldn't say never, but most of the time, we don't want to put a comma in between a subject and its verb like this. There might be other circumstances where maybe you'd put a phrase here in between managers and the verb should, but there is no phrase here. It's just managers, comma, should. We never want to separate the verb and the subject when they're right next to each other with a comma. So even though we got rid of the end, C's still got a problem. Now with B, we've gotten rid of the end, but we've also gotten rid of the comma. We've made it a semicolon. Semicolons can only be used to separate 2 complete sentences. And since this beginning sentence is a subordinate clause, an incomplete sentence, we can't use a semicolon here, so we can get rid of B. But if you notice in D, D is exactly what we wanted. It gets rid of the end, it keeps the comma to separate the 2 sentence parts, and we're good to go. So this one is D. Let's try number 12. Honeybees play an important role in the agriculture industry by pollinating crops. An October 2006 study found that as much as 1/3 of global agriculture depends on animal pollination, including honeybee pollination, to increase crop output. So in this choice, we have a dash following the word pollination. Dashes are another punctuation mark that are tested, but for now, just know that dashes essentially act the same as commas, at least in this particular sentence. But notice earlier in this sentence, we have this phrase, including honeybee pollination. It's separated from the main sentence first with a comma and then with a dash. And here's the thing, either you can use 2 dashes or 2 commas, but you can't mix and match. You can't use a comma and a dash. So since this is underlined, the easiest way to fix this is just change this to a comma, and then we're going to have this phrase separated from the main sentence with 2 commas. And we're going to talk about 2 commas more in a little bit. But here it's a situation where we want to use 2 commas instead of a comma and a dash. And that will set off this phrase, including honeybee pollination, from the rest of the sentence. So we're going to go ahead and go with C. D, we're not going to want to use a semicolon because to increase crop output is not a complete sentence. Using a colon here is unnecessary because we just used a comma here, so we can use a comma after. And then, of course, we don't want to keep the original, so this one is C. Number 14. They know it as colony collapse disorder, CCD. This phenomenon will have a detrimental impact on global agriculture if its causes and solutions are not determined. This one is not so much the issue with the comma in itself. It's an issue with the sentence as a whole. And this error used to be much more important than it is on this test, but just like subject-verb agreement, it's still one you need to know. So the problem here is we have 2 complete sentences separated by just a comma. They know it as colony collapse disorder period, complete sentence. This phenomenon will have a detrimental impact on global agriculture if its causes and solutions are not determined, period. Two complete sentences cannot be separated with only a comma. Either you have to add a conjunction, or make it a semicolon, or make some other change. Now here, since the comma's got to stay, it's not underlined, we have to change something here. And what we're going to have to do is make this sentence no longer a complete sentence. If we can do that, then we can just use the comma. So let's get rid of A. Let's get rid of C, because C still makes us a complete sentence. How about D? Colony collapse disorder, comma, this phenomenon will have. So that's not quite right, because we don't want to start the sentence with just a noun. That's not a good way. So we still need to make this some kind of phrase, but just having the noun colony collapse disorder is not even a sentence anymore. It's nothing at all. So we can get rid of D. How about B? Known as colony collapse disorder, this phenomenon will have. So now we've changed this from a complete sentence into what's called a participial phrase. And what this phrase does, known as colony collapse disorder, it refers to the noun following it in the sentence. So this phenomenon is the thing known as colony collapse disorder. So the sentence is consistent within itself, and we fix the original issue by changing this into something other than an independent clause. So this one's going to be B. Let's try 23. Late last autumn, Giuseppe Furua stood, comma, on the hillside he farms overlooking Italy's Serchio River Valley. Okay, so let's stop there. Again, we looked at this a little bit earlier, where we've got this subject, Giuseppe Furua, we've got the verb stood. And remember before we said we don't want to put a comma between Giuseppe Ferreira, the subject, and the verb. So that's, again, not what's tested here. But they do then put a comma directly after the verb, and this comma separates the verb from the prepositional phrase on the hillside. And that is also something we don't want to do. We don't want to put a comma, in fact, any punctuation, in between a verb and a prepositional phrase, or between a noun and a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrases you don't mark off with commas because they're important to the sentence. They're essential. So for that reason, we're not going to want to put A. And as I said, we don't want any punctuation here. We don't want a semicolon, because even though this is a complete sentence, the second part of the sentence is not complete, so that doesn't work. A dash functions here more or less like a comma. And again, we don't need it. We don't need any punctuation between stood and the prepositional phrase. So we're actually just happy with having no punctuation at all. And that's going to be choice D. Last one, number 43. In another instance of library outreach, a competition at the 2013 State Fair, contestants baked desserts in 3 categories: almond cheesecake, summer mince pie, and Marlboro pie, using recipes from the Mary collection. So here is a situation where we're listing out items. And the key when we're listing out items is that each item should be separated by a comma. And indeed in the original we have that: almond cheesecake, comma, summer mince pie, comma, and Marlboro pie. Notice, as a side note, it's not tested here, but notice that this little list is introduced by 2 dashes, which are essentially acting kind of like commas, but we've got 2 dashes here. And remember before I said when you have stuff in the middle of the sentence, as we did on a previous question, it was number 12, we have this phrase in the middle of the sentence. We need to have either 2 commas or 2 dashes, or no commas and no dashes. Now in this case, they're using 2 dashes. So in this case, we're of course all right with it because we can't change it anyway. But it's just something to keep in mind as a good general rule. I have another video about this. I'll leave this video in the description about the 2 commas or none rule. And this applies to the ACT. It's an ACT video, but it also applies to this test. Anyway, let's go back to this. Is there anything wrong with this separation? Doesn't seem like it. Notice we do want to separate these members of a list with commas, so it looks pretty good, but let's just check the rest of the choices. How about B? Almond, comma, cheesecake, summer, comma, mince, comma, pie. Whoa, we've added commas here that don't logically separate these members of the list. In C, we've gotten rid of the comma between almond cheesecake and summer mince pie, and then we put a comma after summer. Again, we're messing up the members of this list. And D, we've put a comma after each word, but that's not appropriate since it's almond cheesecake, summer mince pie. They're their own categories. We don't need to separate each word by a comma. So the members of the list separated by commas. Choice A is the answer. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.